On the dawn of May 19, 1536, a grey sky settled over the Tower of London. Mist curled around a scaffold of pale wood, lower than usual, foreign in design. A French executioner prepared his sword with calm precision. Word spread quickly through the gathering crowd. A queen would die that day. For the first time in English history, the crown had turned on itself. The Queen's resolve. Inside the cold stone walls of the Tower of London, Anne Boleyn stirred from a restless sleep. 17 days had passed since her arrest, and each had chipped away at her comfort, but not her composure. Though the weight of betrayal and impending death loomed over her, Anne remained poised, her posture still regal. She was only 35, but those who saw her noted how little the ordeal had dulled her presence. Her grace was undiminished. Her few remaining ladies-in-waiting, hearts heavy, assisted her in dressing for the final time. Anne had selected her attire with precision and purpose. She donned a dark gray mantle lined with fur, somber yet stately. Beneath it, a crimson bodice, the color of sacrifice and silent resistance, chosen not only for its symbolism, but also for its practicality. It would not show the blood. The chamber was silent, save for the rustle of fabric and the quiet weeping of her attendants. Anne's composure remained intact. With a touch of gallows humor, she gently fingered her slender neck and remarked, "I have a little neck." Her voice was steady, her irony biting yet graceful. Those present were struck not only by her words, but by the courage they veiled. In those final moments of preparation, Anne was not merely a condemned woman. She was a queen. She faced her fate without bitterness, wrapping herself in dignity as much as in her chosen garments. Her silence was filled with strength, her elegance a quiet rebellion against the injustice awaiting her, a mind shaped in France. Anne Boleyn's formative years were spent immersed in the glittering world of the French court, a place where art, diplomacy, and culture flourished under the Renaissance spirit. As a young lady-in-waiting to Queen Claude, Anne was more than an observer. She was a participant in the elegance and intellectualism that defined the French nobility. She became fluent in French, gained a sharp understanding of court politics, and was exposed to humanist ideas that would shape her reformist leanings later in life. Though she did not fit the era's conventional ideals of beauty, her olive skin, dark eyes, and black hair diverged from the celebrated pale golden standard. Anne possessed a magnetic presence. She carried herself with confidence and sharp wit, drawing admiration from all corners of the court. Her education in music, literature, and theology added to her allure. Those who met her noted the unique blend of sophistication and spirited independence that made her unforgettable. Upon her return to England in the early 1520s, Anne quickly became a distinctive figure at court. She stood apart in a society where noble women were expected to be passive and ornamental. Her eloquence and decisiveness challenged those norms. When Henry VIII began to pursue her, she stood firm against his advances. Unlike her sister Mary, who had been the king's mistress, Anne refused to give in. "If you want me," she made clear, "you must make me queen." With that bold statement, she altered the course of English history forever. The gamble that changed a nation. To win Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII was willing to risk everything: his marriage, his legitimacy, and his nation's religious unity. His obsession with her became the catalyst for England's dramatic split from the Catholic Church. When Pope Clement VII refused to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry defied the papacy. With Parliament's backing, he declared himself supreme head of the Church of England. This seismic decision changed not only Anne's fate, but the spiritual and political course of an entire country. Henry and Anne married in secret in January 1533, and Anne was crowned queen in a lavish ceremony shortly thereafter. Later that year, she gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. The child's arrival was met not with celebration but with disappointment. Henry had longed for a son. Still, Anne held her head high, believing future pregnancies would secure her position. However, Anne's subsequent pregnancies ended in tragedy. She suffered multiple miscarriages, including the loss of a male fetus in early 1536. Each loss chipped away at her influence, weakening her standing in court and with the king. At the same time, Anne's assertive nature, reformist views, and and refusal to fade into the background created powerful enemies. Chief among them was Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, who saw Anne's fall as both politically expedient and personally advantageous. Once Henry's affection cooled and his hopes for a male heir waned, Anne became vulnerable. A web of conspiracies was spun. What had begun as a passionate love affair that reshaped a kingdom now set the stage for betrayal and tragedy. Anne, once the symbol of transformation, became the target of political elimination. The Queen on trial, Anne was arrested in early May 1536 under a storm of scandalous accusations. She was charged with adultery with 5 men, one of whom was her own brother, George Boleyn. The charges extended further, accusing her of conspiring to murder the king and committing treason against the crown. These accusations were not only absurd in nature, but they also reeked of political orchestration and vengeance. Anne, who had once stood at the pinnacle of English nobility, was now caught in a vicious web of courtly intrigue. Stripped of power and support, she was afforded none of the protections traditionally extended to royalty. She was denied legal counsel. The accused were denied the chance to confront their accusers. The so-called witnesses remained nameless and unseen. The outcome had been decided before the trial began. Anne was to be made an example. The trial was held in the Great Hall of the Tower of London, a place that once resonated with celebration and splendor, now echoing with whispered betrayals. Despite the enormity of the charges and the hostile court stacked against her, Anne defended herself with unflinching dignity. Her voice was steady, her words chosen with intelligence and restraint. Observers noted her composure and grace, remarking that she seemed more angel than woman. Anne's performance in court did little to change her fate, but it left a mark. Even in the face of orchestrated ruin, she maintained her queenly presence. She did not plead, did not weep. She stood firm, embodying the strength of a woman determined to face the injustice hurled upon her with unwavering courage. Though the verdict was already written, Anne's legacy was beginning to be etched in a different kind of stone, one of memory, resilience, and quiet defiance. The sentence. Despite her stirring and dignified defense, Anne Boleyn was found guilty of the charges laid against her. The verdict, a foregone conclusion from the moment her enemies initiated the charges, was announced with grim finality. According to the law of the realm, a woman convicted of treason was to suffer death by burning, a horrifying fate meant to terrify and disgrace. But King Henry VIII, still mindful of international perception and perhaps moved by a flicker of his former affection, intervened. He commuted Anne's sentence to death by beheading. This alteration was portrayed as an act of mercy, yet in truth, it was also a strategic decision, ensuring a swifter, cleaner execution with less public spectacle. Moreover, the king ordered that a specialist swordsman be brought from France, renowned for his skill and precision, rather than relying on the traditional English axe. The summoning of a foreign executioner was a rare and unusual choice. It indicated both a desire for a more honorable death and a calculated attempt to avoid a botched execution that might stir public sympathy. The court buzzed with whispers of the planned spectacle, and Anne herself was informed of the change. To those around her, she accepted the news with the same calm strength that had defined her recent days. Though spared the pyre, Anne was not spared the cruelty of anticipation. The preparations for the execution continued with quiet efficiency, the tower's stones bearing silent witness to the final moments of a queen whose rise had reshaped a kingdom and whose fall would become legend. On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn awoke prepared to face her final hour. Her composure was remarkable as she dressed quietly with her attendants. But just as she had come to peace with her fate, a messenger arrived with cruel news. Her execution had been postponed until noon. The delay was no mercy. It was an added torment. Each hour stretched endlessly, heavy with sorrow and dread. Anne spent the time in solemn prayer. She took communion and whispered her innocence, not for her accusers, but to the God she trusted to judge her soul. "For my salvation," she said, "I am clear of what I am condemned for." Her ladies struggled to hold back tears. In a final gesture of grace, Anne turned to them, not in despair, but in quiet gratitude. She offered a parting token to each, a small item of personal meaning. More than gifts, they were a legacy of courage. As noon approached, the muffled thud of drums began to echo beyond the stone walls. Anne stood, calm and composed. "Remember me," she told her ladies, "and how I end." There was no bitterness in her voice, only dignity, carried on the breath of a dying queen. The final walk. Fewer than 1,000 people had gathered in the courtyard of the Tower of London. The air was heavy, charged with a strange and somber reverence, quite unlike the usual bloodthirsty anticipation of an execution. Even the most curious onlookers removed their hats as Anne Boleyn stepped into view. She wore the same dignified ensemble she had chosen with such care, gray and crimson, colors that spoke of mourning, power, and concealed sacrifice. Her poise stunned the crowd. She was every inch a queen. She moved with calm deliberation toward the scaffold, her steps graceful and unhurried. Though death awaited her, she held herself as if walking toward a coronation rather than an execution. The clamor of the crowd gave way to an unnatural silence, broken only by the muffled sounds of her dress brushing the wood and the distant toll of church bells. Once on the platform, Anne was granted the right to speak. She turned to the crowd, her voice strong and clear. She made no protestations of innocence, nor did she accuse those who had betrayed her. Instead, she praised the king, her former husband, the man who had condemned her. It was a brilliant political maneuver, one final gesture of loyalty to protect the fragile future of her daughter, Elizabeth. Her speech was short, but it echoed deeply. Those present would never forget her bearing, her words, or the courage that radiated from her in that final moment. Even facing death, Anne Boleyn managed to command respect. Her final walk was not one of defeat, but of defiance cloaked in grace. In the eyes of history, that walk would become a lasting testament to the inner strength of a woman who refused to be broken. The execution. As the execution hour struck, Anne Boleyn stepped onto the scaffold with unwavering grace. She stood for a moment, taking in the scene, not with fear, but with solemn understanding. In the eyes of the crowd, she was a figure both royal and tragically human. Every gesture she made was deliberate, filled with quiet dignity. She removed her mantle and cap, revealing her long dark hair and the crimson bodice beneath. Her hands did not tremble as she handed the executioner a small purse filled with gold coins, a final act of regal composure, a payment to the man about to end her life. It was not only custom, but a mark of respect for skill. She had heard of his precision, and she wished for a swift death. With no wooden block to rest upon, Anne knelt upright, as was the French custom for beheadings by sword. Her posture was straight, her eyes closed, her lips in silent prayer. One of her faithful ladies stepped forward and gently tied a blindfold over her eyes. Anne murmured her final words, "Lord Jesus, receive my soul. O God, have pity on my soul." The executioner, following French tradition, used a psychological trick to distract her. "Where is my sword?" he asked aloud, though he already held it hidden behind him. Anne instinctively turned her head slightly. In that moment, with a single fluid motion, the sword fell. Her head separated cleanly from her body. A stunned silence gripped the crowd. The executioner lifted her head high and declared her a traitor. But there was no roar, no triumph, only a ripple of murmured disquiet. In that instant, England had lost a queen and gained a martyr. The aftermath. The moment Anne Boleyn's head fell, a cannon thundered from the tower. The report echoed across the Thames, carried swiftly to Whitehall where Henry VIII awaited confirmation. That sound signaled not only Anne's death, but the king's newfound freedom. The very next day, Henry became formally engaged to Jane Seymour. Within 10 days, they were married, a swift and calculated transition that left no space for mourning. Back at the Tower, Anne's body was treated with shocking indifference. There was no coffin prepared, no royal rites for the woman who had once worn the crown of England. Her attendants, heartbroken and dazed, did what they could. With no other recourse, the guards retrieved an old arrow chest. Anne's body, along with her severed head, was laid inside. The crude box was carried to the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where it was buried beneath the stone floor in an unmarked grave. No inscription honored her. No monument marked her name. Henry's campaign to erase Anne's legacy began immediately. Her portraits were torn down and destroyed. Her personal emblems, most notably the white falcon, were removed from court and palace. Her initials were chiseled away from stone and woodwork. Her name was omitted from records, a brutal act of damnatio memoriae, an ancient practice of erasing someone from collective memory. But history would not comply. Though Henry tried to reduce Anne to silence and shadow, the echoes of her voice, her wit, her influence, her defiance lingered. Her erasure became its own indictment, a quiet confession of how deeply she had once mattered. In attempting to bury her legacy, Henry inadvertently ensured it would rise. The Queen reborn. Yet, Henry VIII failed to erase Anne Boleyn entirely. Her legacy endured, quiet and persistent, growing in the hearts of those who remembered her intellect, her reformist spirit, and the injustice of her death. 23 years after her execution, the woman Henry had once dismissed for giving him a daughter was vindicated when that very daughter, Elizabeth, ascended the English throne. Crowned in 1558, Elizabeth I inherited a kingdom racked by religious division and political uncertainty. Yet, from the outset, she demonstrated the shrewdness, poise, and resilience reminiscent of her mother. Her reign would span 45 years and come to be known as the Elizabethan Golden Age, a time of flourishing culture, exploration, and relative stability. Elizabeth's rule was marked by calculated independence. She never married, famously declaring herself wed to her kingdom. This choice, both political and personal, echoed Anne's defiance of traditional roles and dependence. Elizabeth surrounded herself with capable advisors but trusted her own judgment most. Like Anne, she possessed an incisive mind, a commanding presence, and the ability to navigate a court filled with intrigue. Though she rarely spoke publicly of her mother, Elizabeth's actions reflected deep reverence. She reinstated symbols Anne once cherished, including the white falcon emblem. She also appointed many of Anne's former allies to positions of influence. Through this subtle restoration, Elizabeth reclaimed her mother's memory from disgrace and elevated it into something enduring. In Elizabeth's reign, the daughter fulfilled what the mother had only begun. Where Anne had sparked transformation, Elizabeth solidified it. The daughter of a condemned queen became one of England's greatest monarchs. And through her, Anne Boleyn lived again, not as a fallen consort, but as a queen reborn in legacy and strength. During chapel renovations in 1876, bones were found, likely Anne's, and quietly reburied with dignity. Today, a simple glass marker stands on the tower lawn. Each year, roses are laid in her memory. Anne Boleyn became more than a tragic queen. She became a symbol of dignity in the face of injustice, of the risks borne by powerful women, and of how memory endures where monuments do not. Her triumph came not through vindication in her own lifetime, but through her daughter. Elizabeth embraced the white falcon once erased from palace walls and ruled the very kingdom that had taken her mother's life. Anne Boleyn's fall was brutal and deliberate, but it was not the end. In the quiet persistence of legacy, she rose, uninvited, unforgotten.